Hello, and welcome to an Our Fake History digital short. Today we're talking about one of California's most legendary bandits. Roll the theme. Hey everyone, my name is Sebastian Major, and I am the host of Our Fake History. That's the podcast where we explore historical myths and try to determine what's fact, what's fiction, and what is such a good story that it simply must be told. Here on the Digital Shorts, I like to take a little something that we've been exploring on the longer audio podcast and serve it in a more bite-sized video package. Right now on the podcast, we're exploring the real-life Latino bandits who likely inspired the creation of the fictional Zorro character. Of all the likely inspirations, the most storied of these outlaws turned folk heroes is a man originally from Sonora, Mexico, named Joaquin Murrieta. But almost everything we know about Joaquin is coated in a thick layer of myth. The first biography of the outlaw was originally published in 1854 and was cited as a credible source for the next century. But that book, called The Life and Adventures of Joaquin Murrieta, is now regarded by most scholars as a piece of historical fiction. The author cobbled together a patchwork of fact and rumor and then used his own imagination to fill in the blanks. This makes finding the real Joaquin Murrieta especially tricky. But on this digital short, I want to use the time to indulge in the legendary Joaquin and tell you the tale of one of his best remembered exploits. In the spring of 1852, California's gold country had one name on its lips: Joaquin. The bandit Joaquin Murrieta and his gang of cutthroats had been marauding the countryside for a solid year. In that time, they had robbed tens of thousands of dollars worth of gold and horses, leaving a trail of bodies in their wake. What's more, it was rumored that many of the people who had found themselves dispatched by Joaquin were not simply collateral damage from the armed robberies. Many whispered that Joaquin knew the men that he had killed, even when they did not recognize him. This was revenge. But recognizing Joaquin Murrieta was no easy thing. The bandit prided himself on being a master of disguise. His first biographer explained that while pillaging mining camps and robbing the highways, quote, he had worn different disguises and was actually disguised the most when he showed his real features. No man who'd met him on the highway would be apt to recognize him in the cities. He frequently stood very unconcernedly in a crowd and listened to long and earnest conversations in relation to himself, and laughed in his sleeve at the many conjectures which were made as to his whereabouts and intentions. End quote. The most famous bandit in California was also a mystery. He could move undetected through busy towns and quietly laugh to himself as people gossiped about his latest exploits. By 1852, this kind of anonymity was essential if Joaquin Murrieta was going to stay alive. By this point, there was a bounty on his head that many men were keen to collect. But we're told that the fearless Joaquin scoffed at this. His biographer tells us that the first time Murrieta came across a poster advertising a $5,000 bounty, he grabbed a pencil and wrote underneath it, quote, "I will give 10,000, end quote, and signed it Joaquin. This was Murrieta's style, or at least this was the mythical Murrieta's style. He could blend into a crowd or disappear into the shadows, but he still had a bit of an ego. Of course, it would have been smarter to walk past the poster unfazed instead of stopping and risking being spotted as he mocked his own bounty. But I suppose, what's the point of being a legend if you can't act legendary from time to time? Joaquin was clearly in one of these moods when, in the spring of 1852, he found himself in a bustling town in Calaveras County, California. We're told that Joaquin disguised himself in a bespoke suit and played the part of a, quote, elegant and successful gambler, end quote. In this disguise, he headed to the saloon to place a few bets at the Monte table. He hadn't been in the establishment for long before he heard someone mention his name. He looked up and saw 4 Anglo-American men loudly bantering about the, quote, bandit king Joaquin Murrieta. These men were talking tough. Each of them bragged that this Mexican outlaw would be no match for them if they were ever to meet. According to Murrieta's biographer, one of the men loudly declared, quote, that he would just like once in his life to come across Joaquin, and that he would kill him as quick as he would kill a snake. Now, the smart thing for Joaquin to do in that moment would be laugh into his sleeve, as he had done so many other times. But on this night, he was in a different sort of mood. After hearing this idle threat, we're told that Joaquin jumped up on the Monte table, threw open his cloak, brandished his 6-shooter, and declared, quote, I am Joaquin. If there's any shooting to be done, I am in, end quote. The crowd was stunned. The tough-talking Americans froze, not daring to take their presumably longed-for opportunity to kill Joaquin as quick as a snake. Then Joaquin jumped from the table and made a quick exit. Quote, mounting his horse, he dashed off with his party at his heels, sending back a whoop of defiance, which rung out thrillingly in the night air, end quote. Now, even though there really isn't much to this story, this little episode has gone down as the definitive Joaquin Murrieta moment. None of Joaquin's alleged robberies, shootouts, murders, or acts of righteous vengeance have been as well remembered as this colorful moment atop the Monte table. This may be because this episode was transformed into an iconic Zorro moment. The 1920 silent film The Mark of Zorro begins in a California saloon, much like the one described in Joaquin's first biography. In it, a crowd discusses the exploits of the bandit Zorro, and one man even displays the letter Z that has been carved into his face. This prompts the drunken and buffoonish Mexican Army Sergeant Gonzalez to start bragging about how he would slice this Zorro into ribbons should he ever appear. Listening to all of this and laughing along is the pampered playboy Don Diego de la Vega, a.k.a. Zorro. He then takes his leave as the drunken Gonzalez continues abusing the patrons in hopes of baiting Zorro, a known protector of the oppressed. Just then, shrouded in a puff of smoke from his lit cigarette, Zorro appears. He draws his sword and smilingly says, quote, keep your sword, Gonzalez. You will have use for it, end quote. You can hear the echo of, I am Joaquin. If there's shooting to be done, I am in. But it would be the first part of that declaration, I am Joaquin, that would become an immortal catchphrase. The writers of Mexican folk ballads, known as corridos, would use that phrase as a defiant chorus in their musical retellings of the Joaquin Murrieta myth. For many Mexicans and other Latin Americans, the name Joaquin would carry a similar connotation to Stagger Lee in the African American community. Stagger Lee was mythologized as the baddest of the bad, a dangerous man who was not to be trifled with. Joaquin Murrieta had the same cachet. I am Joaquin means I'm not to be messed with. Don't think you can talk smack while I'm in earshot. I am Joaquin. Even though it would be wiser to hide right now, my pride won't let me do it. I am Joaquin. It's no surprise that in the 1960s, the Chicano leader, Rodolfo Corky Gonzalez, gravitated towards this phrase and made it the refrain of his fiery epic poem articulating Chicano identity. He titled this epic, I Am Joaquin, and begins the poem with the lines, quote, I am Joaquin, lost in a world of confusion, caught up in the whirl of a gringo society, end quote. For Gonzalez, the myth of Joaquin Murrieta was a potent reminder of Hispanic survival in America. But did Joaquin Murrieta ever actually say these words? The only evidence of it comes from that highly fictionalized biography written in 1854. But as Borderlands cultural critic Jose Manuel Valenzuela reminds us, quote, "Myth is not validated in historical truth, but in its social functionality," end quote. I think that might just be an academic way of saying just because it didn't happen doesn't mean it isn't real. To find out more about Joaquin Murrieta and the birth of Zorro, then please check out the audio version of the Our Fake History podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to like and subscribe to this YouTube channel to get more wild stories from the past.